Hey guys, what's going on? My name is Anton, and welcome to today's video for Honkai Star Rail. Now, KAFKA has been released, and a lot of us KAFKA wanters have pulled KAFKA and maybe even pulled out our wallets and actually gotten our KAFKAs. So, KAFKA for me has been a character I've been wanting since basically the announcement of KAFKA, since Honkai Star Rail was first announced. When I first saw her design, I really wanted her. Just the design of the character alone really drew me to her. And on top of that, once we started to learn more and more about her, specifically her kit, I really liked her because I really like DOT gameplay. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to try my hand at making a guide for KAFKA. Yes, I know like a lot of other people make guides. I just wanted to try my hand at it. Quick warning though, quick like preface here before we get too far in the video. This is my first time ever making a guide for Honkai Star Rail characters, so I apologize if it's a little rough around the edges. If you have any kind of, advice here to make it better, if there's anything you like as well in the video, of course, you can always leave a comment down below and I will take it into consideration for my next guide video, my next build video, and put it into that. Now, quick overview of the video. We're going to be talking about KAFKA. We'll talk about her kit. We'll talk about her eidolons, which ones are good, her traces, the trace priorities, the minor traces, major traces, etc., her light cones and what I think are her best light cones, and what teams she goes in. Pretty, in my opinion, standard guide outline. So yeah, let's actually go and look at KAFKA though, really quick, and let's see what she actually does. Now, KAFKA's kit. First off, we have her basic attack. Not much to talk here about her basic attack. It's as basic as you can get. It just does some damage. Yeah, you can say, well, it helps put some DOTs on. Whatever. But I feel like, as you can see here with my KAFKA I'm building up, I currently have it at level 1. And that's because, in my opinion, you should never be using KAFKA's basic attack. If something happened, you either just mismanaged your skill points or you just don't need any extra damage. You're just finishing something off. Next up, we have what I consider her bread and butter, her skill, which deals some damage. It cleaves too, so, it hits the main target and it deals some damage to those next to the main target. However, and this is what is, like, in my opinion, the big thing about KAFKA, if they have DOTs on them, those DOTs will basically pop and do some damage, and they'll actually stay there. They won't be used up to, they'll just deal some damage, and then they'll stick there, so when the enemy tries to take their turn, they'll take more DOT. This is really like what makes KAFKA push out so much damage. Of course, you have to get your DOTs on them, but it's not that hard in all honesty. Next up, we got her ultimate. Deals some damage to everyone, so unlike her skill, it hits everything, not cleaving. Will shock them as well. And if they are shocked, it will also, similar to her skill, deal some of that damage right away. However, her trace, one of her traces, Torture, now instead of just popping the shock DOT, it will deal some DOT damage for all of the DOTs. So, bleed, wind shear, burn, whatever. And you're basically turning her ultimate into her skill, kind of, if that makes sense. So really good. I'd say once you get that trace unlocked, which I'm pretty sure it's her first major trace, her ultimate becomes really, really good. Energy cost of 120, so, not cheap, but not too expensive, so it's going to be going off quite a bit, and it's going to be worth a lot of damage whenever it goes off. Next up, we got her talent. Talent is pretty cool. When an ally uses a basic attack, KAFKA does a follow-up attack and deals some lightning damage, which is whatever. You're not really going to be building her with crit rate, crit damage, so the damage isn't really anything to write home about. But the main thing about this is that it has a 100% base chance to inflict shock, and that is really good for just, starting to stack up those DOTs on your enemies to then pop them with her skill or her ultimate. So really nice. Only can be used once a turn though, so just keep that in mind. You can't really just keep spamming it. If you could use it more than once per turn, KAFKA would be really busted and broken and crazy good. She already is crazy good though. And lastly, we have her technique here. Not much to talk about here, not much to write home about with her technique. It's just like a lot of other characters, attack some enemies. The special thing, the unique thing here, is that it will shock them. So, attack around you, attack around KAFKA, and when you enter battle, they will have some shock on them, which is pretty good for just setting up some DOTs at the very, very beginning. So that's very, very nice. Now let's go and talk about her Eidolons really quick. Okay, so before we talk too much about all of her different Eidolons, I will recommend this if you're considering pulling for her E1 or for her light cone. I personally feel like E0 KAFKA plus her signature light cone is better than E1 light cone with some other random light cone. But as for her Eidolons, though, we'll talk about them really quick. First Eidolon, when the talent triggers follow-up attack, there's a 100% base damage to increase the DOT received by the target by 30% for 2 turns. It is pretty good, but again, nothing crazy to write home about in my opinion compared to what you can get from her light cone. E2, though, on the other hand, is where it starts to get a little bit spicy. Not a very complex Eidolon either. Just when she's on the field, DOT dealt by all allies increases by 25. That's a pretty big jump in my opinion. So if you do want to spend a little bit of money, or you do have a lot of rolls saved up, maybe consider going for E2 KAFKA. I do think it's a very big jump in damage, but again, I do think before you even start rolling for Eidolons, try for her light cone, her signature light cone first. We'll talk more about why that is so good when we start talking about light cones, but her light cone is just really, really good. As for E3 and E5, it's, as you'd expect, like every other character, it's just increasing their kit skills. E4, target takes damage from the shock status inflicted by her. She regens some energy, which is just like, yeah, it's nice, a little extra energy, but nothing like, you probably don't want to wail for this or anything. And then her E6, shock inflicted by the enemy by the ult, the technique, or the follow-up, now has a damage multiplier increase of 156%. Big damage increase, but again, this is E6. If you are going to go for this, you're either going to need some time and probably some rerun banners, or you're going to have to bust out the wallet and spend some money here. Quite a bit of money, too, to get an E6. But yeah, I will say this. E2 is really, really good, and if you want to go for something, I'd say E2 is where you get a big jump in damage. But again, I'm saying it for the third time now, really, really consider getting her light cone at least to S1 first, because it's just so good. Now, let's go and talk about the traces really quick, because there is stuff to talk about with the traces, and it matters with some of her stat calculations. So here we have her traces. First things first, though, what I would say is if you're trying to prioritize anything, I'd say personally, in my opinion, I would prioritize ultimate first, and then her skill, and then her talent, and then all the other traces, except for maybe HP traces, and then her basic attack. Like I said earlier when we were talking about her kit, you pretty much never want to use her basic attack, so you don't really need to upgrade it too much, if ever. Even for the first level, it's really cheap to upgrade, but even then, I'd rather just use these trace mats to fuse them together and get higher level trace mats for other traces. But yeah, again, so in terms of priority upgrades, ult, skill, talent, basic. For her major traces, let's talk about them. We have Torture. We already talked about it. It's the one that basically upgrades her ult. So it will check all DOTs instead of just shock and pop all of them. Next up, we got Thorns here. Base chance for a target enemy to get shocked by the ult, the technique, and the talent triggered follow-up attack increases by 30%, which is pretty good. An extra just 30% chance to, get a DOT on them, which is really nice. And her final major trace is when someone dies while shocked, she gets an extra 5 energy, which is, it adds up. It's not a big one. So as for her major traces, I'd say Torture is so important. You need to get Torture unlocked. Since it is an early trace, it's her first major trace. It's relatively cheap, so it won't be expensive to get or anything, but get this unlocked. This is just such a big jump in damage. If you're playing other DOT characters, of course, like I feel like I should say that, like if you're playing, Sampo, Luca, whatever. But yeah, after Torture, I would say you want Thorns next. Just, making sure your shock actually lands, and then once you feel like you have a little bit extra resources, you can go for Plunder. Like, it's just a nice little thing, little extra cherry on top here, a little extra energy every time you kill something, so you can get more ultimates, which is nice. As for the minor traces, I'd say just pick up attack, just pick up effect hit rate. She does get quite a bit of effect hit rate. We'll talk about this a little bit more once you start talking about stats more in depth, but she does get quite a bit of effect hit rate just from traces alone. She gets 4% here, 6% here, and another 8% here, which is really good. And then she also gets a solid amount of attack percent, 6% here, 6% there, 4 there, 8 there, and 4% there, which is really nice. So that's basically the traces of KAFKA and what I think are the priorities for them. Next, I want to head to the light cones, but before I head to light cones, I also want to take this time to talk about her stats really quick. We'll talk more about her stats as well once we get to things like Relics, but for KAFKA, I'd say the most important stats are attack and speed. She doesn't really care about crit rate or crit damage, so just ignore that, of course. I'd say the goals for those are, for her attacks, probably around, I'd say around like low 3000s, like 3200, maybe up to 3600 once it starts to get more fine-tuned. As for speed, I'd say bare minimum is 120 speed, maybe around 140, like 135 to 140 once you start to get better and better relics. But 120 is the minimum, in my opinion, to activate one of the relics I'll mention, which is Space Sealing Station. And then this is a very important note, effect hit rate. I currently only have 22.5% effect hit rate on my KAFKA. Eventually it'll go up as I get another minor trace unlocked. But I would say you want to reach exactly 28% effect hit rate. And why is that? Well, at 28% effect hit rate EHR, you are guaranteeing shock to land on enemies that have a 40% resistance. That's a lot of enemies. So in terms of priorities, I would say get your effect hit rate to 28. Make sure to calculate how your minor traces are gonna affect your calculations. But then after that, attack and speed. You don't really need to worry about crit rate, crit damage. You can throw in break effect's not bad either. Like break effect percent, you can throw, like that's not a bad substat. But again, attack percent, speed, effect hit rate until a certain point, until 28%. Maybe like a couple of HP percent or defense percent substats are a consideration to, just make her a little bit tankier so she can survive some AoE. But again, speed and attack percent, and you're good. So as I was saying though, I wanted to talk about light cones next. So let's go and talk about light cones. Okay, so for KAFKA and her light cone choices, best in slot light cone? Best in slot light cone in my opinion. I don't think this is going to be too crazy of a take here. I would say her signature light cone, patience is all you need. Reason for that, yes, it gives more damage, which is great, but this right here, after every attack launched by the wearer, their speed increases, stacking up to 3 times. And again, as I mentioned earlier when we were talking about stats, one of the reasons I wanted to talk about stats before we talk about light cones, KAFKA loves speed. Every character loves speed, really, but KAFKA especially loves speed because that means more speed. That means, you know what that means? More follow-up attacks, which means more DOTs. Also means more skill activations, which means more damage. So that's great. And more ultimates too, of course. So yes, if you're just looking for a best in slot light cone, patience is all you need. Even if it's S1, it's still really good. After that though, I'd say there's a little bit of argument here, but I personally feel like the next best light cone is the other 5-star light cone in the name of the world, Welt's light cone here. Increase the wearer's damage to debuffed enemies by 24%. And then when the wearer uses their skill, EHR effect hit rate for this attack increases by 18% and attack increases by 24%. You know, attack increasing by 24%. Really, really good there. Good base stats here just because it's a 5-star. And the damage percent up just is really, really good. So, and you're probably going to pair KAFKA with someone who can debuff. However, if you're lucky, or you just got good rolls, I guess, I do honestly think S5 Good Night Sleep Well is better than In the Name of the World. Let's read S5, or let's read Good Night Sleep Well. For every debuff the target enemy has, the damage dealt by the wearer increases by 12%. This effect also applies to DOTs. And of course, as I was saying, at S5, this is now a 24% increase up to 3 times. That is, what, a 72% increase? That's pretty good. That's a lot of damage. And with a DOT team, basically a KAFKA team, I think it's really easy to have 3 stacks of this. So, huge increase of damage. Now, what I'm personally using, I don't think it's the best, but what I personally use is Fermata because I'm not completely free to play, but I'm like barely spending money on the game. I think Fermata is a pretty solid light cone. Increase the break effect, which is fine, but also increase the damage that enemies afflicted with shock or wind shear will take. Also applies to DOTs, of course. So, you know, I like to pair because of this, since I'm using this on KAFKA, I do like to use Sampo in my team just because it's not Sampo, wind shear. After that, though, I guess if you don't have any of those light cones, you could use Eyes of the Prey, increase EHR by 20%, increase DOT by 24%. It is very solid. Also, if you want to try and make like a weird effect hit rate build, you can try for that, but it is a decent option. As for one other light cone I would say you can try out, I think it's actually pretty solid. The Luca light cone, resolution shines as pearls of sweat, where it hits an enemy if the enemy is not already ensnared, 60% chance to ensnare them. Ensnared enemies have their defense decreased by 12%. I do think this does lower her damage, her single damage. I don't know how to put this really, but the damage she does by herself. But because it's lowering the defense, that means the rest of your team is doing a little bit more damage. So, you know, maybe you have like another DOT. Maybe you have a Luca or a Sampo on the team as well, helping to push out some damage. So you can consider that. But yeah, basically I would say go for her light cone if you have it. If you don't, Welt's light cone, which you can also buy in the Starlight shop, which is definitely consideration. And then after that, you can consider Goodnight Sleep Well. But if you have S5 Goodnight Sleep Well, that's really good with her. And then Fermata, and then Eyes of the Prey, and then Resolution Shines as Pearls of Sweat. Quick note though, I do think you might be able to try either of the Silver Wolf light cones. I'm not a big fan of either of them on KAFKA because they're not really increasing her damage that much. Like they increase EHR and help regen energy, but they're just, in my opinion, not doing that much for KAFKA specifically. Now, let's go and talk about Relics next. Okay, so as for KAFKA and Relics, I don't think there is really much to be said here. In all honesty, I do think this will be probably a quick section of the video. Just pick Band of Sizzling Thunder, the Lightning Relic set. You know, increases lightning damage for a 2-piece. KAFKA likes that. 4-piece, when the wearer uses their skill, increase the wearer's attack by 20% for 1 turn. KAFKA loves using her skill. KAFKA loves attack percent. So I don't see why you would use anything else. Yes, there are some other things you can do. We'll talk about them really quick. You can go for the 2-2 split, I'd say, using 2 Band of Sizzling Thunder and 2 Musketeer. Musketeer set, I believe, when it's a 2-piece, it gives you a 12% increase in attack, which is not bad. So maybe you just haven't found a good 4-piece for lightning, and you have a good 2-piece for musketeer. You can just use that. It's pretty solid. Hacker space is also pretty good too for the speed increase, but again, I think the 2-2 splits of Thunder set plus musketeer or hacker space is worse than just a 4-piece set of Band of Sizzling Thunder. That's it. I will say this, on 2 other relic sets, you can try the break set. I do think the break build on KAFKA is more of a meme, and the amount of effort and the amount of farming and resources you're going to pump into KAFKA for this break build is just not worth it, but it is fun. I will say that. It is fun, but I don't think it's worth. And you can also try Genius of Brilliant Stars, the Quantum set. You might say, like, well, why would I want to play the Quantum set on KAFKA? Obviously, she's not doing quantum damage. Well, the 4-piece set says, when the wearer deals damage to the target enemy, ignore 10% defense. That's also already pretty good. If the target enemy has quantum weakness, they ignore an additional 10% of defense. So that's a 20% defense ignore right there. I don't think this is better than the lightning set, but you know, if you're against quantum enemies, or maybe you're pairing KAFKA with Silver Wolf to, you know, and you can give them quantum weakness, it's something. There's something you can cook with there, but I do think, I don't think there is any question here. I think lightning set is the best set. As for substats, speed and attack, get that effect hit rate up to 20%, 28%. After that, maybe a little bit of break effect is nice too, but then the other stats are just whatever. Maybe like some defensive stats so she doesn't die, like HP percent or defense percent. But really, speed, attack percent, speed and attack percent are the best. As for the main stats, on the body, attack percent, not much to talk about there. Just go for it. Just don't try to be cute. Just pick attack percent. As for the feat, either attack percent or speed. I personally like speed a little bit more because you're already stacking so much attack percent on everything else. You know, a lot more speed. Having the main stat being speed is just really nice on the boots, on the feet. But again, if you don't have any speed stat boots, but you have a nice attack stat boots, you can use attack percent. It's not that much of a difference in my opinion. They're pretty equal. As for the planar relic sets though, again, not much to talk about here. I think there is only one real choice, and that is Space Sailing Station. Increase the wearer's attack by 12% when their speed reaches 120, which is not hard to do. Get another 12% attack, so 24% attack increase here. Not difficult. As for the main stats, I'd say for the sphere itself, lightning damage. Just don't get too cute, just do lightning damage. As for the rope, on the other hand, again, I don't think you want to get too cute and do like, I don't know, like energy regen or something. Just get attack percent on the rope and go crazy and deal damage. I will say this though, you could consider Talia Kingdom of Banditry. I'm not a big fan of this, but again, the break effect build that some people like to do, it is cute, but again, I think this break effect build with KAFKA is just not that good. And now let's go and talk about other characters to pair up with KAFKA and KAFKA teams. Okay, so before we actually look at the teams, let's just talk about some characters that pair well with KAFKA. Generally, when I'm building a KAFKA team, I want to go KAFKA plus DOT plus support plus healer, sustainer. Sometimes maybe KAFKA plus 2 supports plus sustainer, have KAFKA be the only the main damage source, kind of that hyper carry style. But who are characters that work well with KAFKA? First off, Silverwolf. Really big fan of Silverwolf here. She helps implement weaknesses, so you know, that lightning weakness, so KAFKA gets a little bit extra damage increase. Pretty skill point friendly too, because she can still weaken enemies with her basic attack too, lowering, you know, things like speed, attack, defense, whatever. So big fan of Silverwolf. Next up, I like Asta as well too. I think Asta just doesn't get enough respect in general in the game. But I do really like Asta here. She has that trace that gives her some burn on her basic attack. Her ultimate increases speed, and she has the talent to get those charges for more damage as well, and her skill is really good at breaking. Next up, we got both Sampo and Luca. I'm not going to talk too much about either of them. They're both just more DOTs, so if you want another DOT character on your team, you put one of them. I personally think Sampo is a little bit better. Obviously, it depends on Eidolons. Like, do you have like Eidolons on Luca? Do you have Eidolons on Sampo, etc., etc.? But I really do like Sampo. It also, of course, depends on what content you're trying to complete. Like, maybe you're trying to beat something that has wind weakness, or maybe it has physical weakness or whatever. So both of them are pretty good. Again, I went with Sampo. I also really like Sampo versus Luca because Sampo can use his basic attack a lot more than having to use his skills, so that helps save skill points, and KAFKA loves skill points. As for another couple of characters I like here, I like Bronya. I mean, of course, you might say like, well, of course, Bronya is great, but I do think Bronya is really good, just, you know, increasing. It does feel like a waste because of the crit increasing she does, but she does move things up, advances the actions of characters, and that is really nice too. Basically allowing KAFKA to attack twice in a turn, so that's pretty good. And then everyone's favorite Fox Girl, Tingyun. I think Tingyun is also a reasonable option to pair with KAFKA. Her ult giving some more energy, increasing damage, in all honesty, is just really good. So yeah, those are some characters I think pair well with KAFKA. Of course, there are others as well, like Serval is solid. Pella is also good too. Pella is pretty good too with KAFKA for similar reasons that I mentioned with Silverwolf. Plus, Pella does increase effect hit rate, I believe, with one of her traces, so it's pretty nice. So let's go and actually look at some teams though. So this is my team I like to use for KAFKA. I'm still working on it and building it all up, but I mentioned it earlier when we were talking about the characters. I like KAFKA plus DOT in the form of Sampo here, plus support in the form of Silverwolf, plus healer in the form of Natasha here. I do think Luocha would be a better healer. I don't have Luocha, but Luocha's really good. Just, you know, gives you more skill points because of how skill point friendly Luocha is. I do think you could also, as I said it earlier, take this team, put in Bronya over Silverwolf is pretty solid too. You could also go like Natasha, KAFKA, Luca, and Sampo. I think that's also pretty good. You can also just not run a healer at all. I do think in some content, specifically something like MOC, where you don't really need that much sustain, you just want to kill things as fast as possible and just barely have your characters live. I actually think you could go like a hyper carry style team with KAFKA, and that would be KAFKA, Asta, Tingyun, Bronya, probably. And I do think that would be a very good team for MOC, but I think that would be bad for a lot of other content because your team will just die because no healing. But yeah, those are the team ideas I would say to consider with KAFKA. Not much else to talk about though with her teams. Pretty standard, standard concept here. KAFKA plus DOT plus support. Your favorite support, whichever support you feel like, whether it's Silverwolf, Asta, Pella, Bronya, Tingyun, etc., etc., and a healer, so you know you don't die. So Luocha, Natasha, Bailu, Lynx when Lynx comes out, maybe depending on Lynx's kit. Anyway, though, that is my entire kit, or sorry, my entire guide for KAFKA. I hope you enjoyed this video I have created. I'd love to hear your opinion though on KAFKA and on the video. So what do you think of KAFKA though? Do you like KAFKA? Do you think she's OP? Do you think she's overrated? Do you think she is pushing out Jingyuin? There's a lot of people thinking she just completely has power crept Jingyuin. I personally don't think so, but I can see why some people do. And how are you building KAFKA? Do you have any kind of builds I haven't mentioned or talked about here that you have been trying out and you've been having success with? I'd love to hear how you've been building KAFKA. Maybe you have been having success with the break effect build. Maybe you have a team that I haven't mentioned or even slightly touched on that you're having success with. I'd love to hear your team comps, your KAFKA builds, what relics you're playing with her, etc., etc. Anyway, though, like I said, that's going to be it for the video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed it, I'd love it if you could leave a like or a comment down below. It always helps me out and it always helps out the channel. And if you guys want to keep up with the Honkai Star Rail content, I always try to put out multiple videos every single week. You can always go and subscribe to the channel as well. And if you want to watch me play some Honkai Star Rail, you can go and check me out over on Twitch at twitch.tv/Steniton, where I stream pretty much every single day. Anyway, though, with that all said and done, thank you all once more for watching this video. Until I see you guys in the next one, bye.